Going back historically, the root of Almajiranci originates from the Prophet's Majlis. When Abu Huraira left his hometown, came to Medina, doing nothing, and stayed there just to learn from the Prophet. He was jobless, and he was given token, but he has become one of the greatest collectors of hadith. That is the root of Almajiranci in Islam. With the expansion of Islam to distant lands, especially during the several long centuries of Islamic civilization in Andalus, that is the present-day Spain and Portugal, Muslims perfected the Almajiri system for imparting education, as every mosque was attached with a public school in which the children of the poor were taught to read and write and instructed in the precept of the Quran. It is in Cordoba that the Sangaya system was originally introduced as academies, being presided by a malam, that is a rector, usually arranged in 25 or 30 apartments, each calculated for accommodating 4 students. The twin cities of Cordoba then and Toledo become what we can now compare to London and New York in civilization. At that time when the Muslim had over 70 libraries in Cordoba alone, and over 500 public baths across the city, with boulevards tree-lined, and a man can walk throughout the night with street lighting. Across the mainland, in mainland Europe, in France, as William Draper reported in his monumental book, The Intellectual Development of Europe, in the rainy season, when Cordoba were having street lights, in Paris, when you come out, ankle-knee deep mud is your pavement. And in England, if you are walking down the street, you will be careful, because lest a woman finish bathing her son and throw out the water on the street. The Queen of England at that time would not take bath during the dark age unless it's a remedy for an ailment. So as Europe was in dark age, the Muslims in Spain are translating Greek philosophy and authoring books. The grandeur and splendor of Andalus made the European marvel at how those camel riders were able to build this civilization. Youths were selected among the Europeans, intellectuals, and sent to spy on the civilization in Andalus. And among them was Peter the Venerable, who was not only fluent in Arabic, but was the first to translate Quran into a European language, into Latin. Gebert of Aurillac, who worked as a translator, he was a mathematician and an astronomer. He worked at the library of Al-Hakam II. That library at that time was the greatest personal library in the world, having over 400,000 books. Gebert of Aurillac was later appointed as the Pope as Sylvester II. So the Europeans realized that the reason why those Muslims from the desert riding their camels were able to build this civilization were 2 things. Number 1, their holy scripture, the Quran, and how they adhere to it, word to word. And the second is the culture of the educational system. That educational system was built on the foundation of the Almajiri Sangaya system in Cordoba. Those 2 key things strengthened the Islamic civilization, which gave its edge over all other civilizations during those centuries. The Europeans decided to adopt the Quranic injunction without the fear of conversion to Islam, and incorporated the educational system into their educational system. Most of the etiquette we see today everywhere in the world, undergraduate, postgraduate, doctorate, professorial, all were derived from the original Almajiri Sangaya system created in Cordoba, what we call here the Polo, the Titipiri, and the Alaramba. And even the gown, the academic gown donned by graduates, was copycat of the gowns and turbans of professors in Andalusian universities. So most of the etiquette we see in the Nigerian university or anywhere in the universities in the world is copycat of what was initiated there under the Almajiri system. The Almajiri system came to West Africa through the Almoravids in the 11th century. And the Wangarawa in the 13th century introduced it to Hausa land during the reign of Sarkin Kano Yaji. The 14th century ruler of Kano, Muhammad Rubba, with the help of the celebrated scholar Al-Magili, who authored the famous book on the obligation of the prince, helped in establishing the Almajiri system as Angaya in Kano. This Angaya system had been one of the most beneficial cultures in the past, which even the Europeans, after colonization, copied and introduced the boarding school system. In the past, our society had immensely benefited from the culture, being the main reservoir of grooming and producing teachers, imams, and preachers. And in fact, even Mfodio himself arose from the same platform and declared war on the tyrannical Hardy kings and established the Fulani Caliphate. His revolution created an empire of peace, justice, and knowledge across most of West Africa for over a century. Literacy in what is now modern Nigeria, based on the Ajami writing, had helped a lot in integrating Hausa society after the Fulani Jihad. The Makarantun Allo were a source of imparting education to children as they grow up. Malamai, mostly trained by Makarantun Allo, were an important pillar in education and morality in communities. But after the colonial conquest and the dismantling of northern Nigeria, the Mfodio Empire crumbled. Almajiri as a system of education began to take a different shape, as the traditional ruler's authority was curtailed by the colonial system, thus negatively impacting on the Almajiri educational system. Lack of funding and neglect left those Quranic schools to fend for themselves. But before then, Malamai were heavily relying on the assistance of the traditional rulers for the provisions of lands to be cultivated by the Almajiri for the food they consume during the year, and the doling out of zakat and sadaqah collected from the well-to-do and distributed. Parents also contributed a large source of their grains to the malams for the upkeep of their wards. So with that all gone, teachers had no choice but to send out those young boys and beg for alms for themselves and their teachers. And in those days, students there were chosen to be sent for Almajiranci, usually at 10 years above. But colonialism had seriously contributed in the evolution of the standard Almajiranci practice for centuries in West Africa. Almajiranci today has lost all its former glories and reduced to nothing but a menace to the Almajiris themselves, to parents, teachers, and the society in general. Now children as young as 4 years old can be seen out in Almajiranci, a new culture that wasn't obtainable in the past. And it is inhumane by any standards one can think of, be it religious, social, economic, and psychological, for such cruelty to separate a 4-year-old boy with his mother. Scientific research, notably the psychodynamic perspective of Sigmund Freud and August Eichel's latent delinquency, had shown that the close link between early childhood repression and inadequate socialization with impulsive aggression, lack of empathy, and the inability to feel guilt in adult years, which is all prevalent and all can be seen among our youth that pass through these stages. Corruption had eaten away the fabric of our society, and it has contributed a lot, as government had failed in building infrastructure in the rural areas that could have created the much needed jobs. So what are the solutions now for Almajiranci? Number one, it is very unrealistic to call for total ban of Almajiranci, because recent statistics, demographics, health survey has shown that since 2015 we have over 13 million out of school children, and in this year it is estimated to be about 20 million. You cannot send all these children back to their homes. So we need integration. As we have seen in the Islamic history, slavery wasn't banned outright. It was instrumentally, slowly, because if it was banned outright, the whole economic system of Arabia in the 7th century will crumble. Likewise, we need to implement policies that will gradually eradicate the current system of Almajiranci, and chief among that is reviving agriculture. Northern Nigeria is blessed with river systems and dams, which with proper and little investment could revert us to agricultural communities we used to be. Let me give you an example here. I'm from Kano State. The Tiga Dam was built 40 years ago. And today, the local government of Pura, Ranu, Garumalam, about 6 local government in the enclave, and Bunkure, you will see the greatest agricultural output from any other zone in the north. And you will never see children Almajiranci from that region. And you will not go to Asaba or Delta or Lagos and see able-bodied youths from those regions traveling for Chirani in that area, simply because they were gainfully employed all year round. That is just one dam, and that dam is its utilization capacity is only 40% in the last 40 years. And Kano State, if you take the road from BUK to Dai, you have 4 dams on the same road, and you have one adjacent on the right, that is the Chalawa Goje Dam, and you have the Pagwai Dam. 6 dams lying sleeping idle, while one single dam has transformed the whole area in that direction. I visited Chalawa when I was making a documentary, and I cried literally. Chalawa Dam is the largest dam in Kano State, and it has a spillway. That spillway for donkey years is wasting waters that are not tapped and irrigated, going through the bush. And not 1% of that dam is being utilized. I'm sorry, Professor, agriculture is still very important in Kano. Recently, last year in 2021, China had banned fishing on Yangtze River. Yangtze River is 6,300 kilometers. But they banned fishing throughout the entire length of that river. Why? Because the resources were depleted. And the ban is going to stay for the next 10 years until when the fish products were replenished. And instead of that, they are going to the high sea, building football-sized cages and doing fish farming. Nigeria imports $5 billion worth of fish every year. That money should go to Kano. Those 4 dams or 6 dams with little investment, with little manpower, we can do the fish farming that we will supply the whole of the country. The second solution is revisiting the national policy on education. The national policy on education had given room for funding and support for the Almajiranci. And the first government to take advantage of the policy was Jonathan administration. All our northern leaders, nobody has cared to look into the policy and give out room how that will change the fate of the Almajiranci. But unfortunately, during the Jonathan time, the issue was maybe haphazardly and politics came into it, but at least he built 157 model schools across the north and some part of western Nigeria. 165. So, and do you know that all of them, except one that I know, had been comatose today? None is functioning. And the idea was to make clusters, to bring Almajiranci closer to government, give them schooling, give them literacy and numeracy, and they keep on doing their Quranic education and given skills. The only one of a section I know is in Gombe State. There is one Malam Mahmoud Basokochi. When he was handed over the school, he forget about the government. He forget about Subeb and Ministry of Education in Gombe. He reorient his community, brings the right people, tell them that this is what government has doled out to us. And I have school with over 1,000 Almajiris. Come together, let's work together and build it. And before you know it, I had an interview on the BBC with one little boy, a graduate from that school, that learned numeracy, learned literacy, learned skill acquisition as a tailor, and has become an instructor in the same school. In fact, I think the number of Almajiris should be a blessing, not a curse to us. You go to Indonesia, you go to China, you go to anywhere where there is serious leadership. Numbers, population is not a minus, it's a plus. How many pair of slippers do we need in Kano and Kaduna per year? We all import them. Why, if we can teach our Almajiris how to make slippers in those clusters, in those Angaya schools, while they learn numeracy and literacy? So the next solution, I think, with regard to this, is we have to look at the legislative aspect of it. As I've said earlier, students as young as 12 years are now going for Almajiranci. Almajiris, there is need for our legislatures, both in the State House of Assemblies across the north, to implement new laws that will prevent any minor of being sent to Almajiranci. And even those that are not minors that will be sent out must be within their locality. And that is where the clusters Angaya system come in. When you have the Angaya system, when you want to send your son to Almajiranci, send him there. He will learn numeracy, literacy, and skills. Then we will also need to ban Almajiranci, the street begging aspect. Laws must be, I think Katsina State has passed one. So we need all the state, especially in the Northwest, to work toward that. Another area is funding. As we can see, the National Policy on Education, through the 2004 IBEM Act, has made it mandatory and free education for every Nigerian. We need to access that, and that is where our government comes in. And then in the states, we need committees spearheaded by politicians, ulemas, NGOs to pool funding. In the north, we have so many parastatals, we have so many banking, but they are not remitting their social to the communities they are benefiting from. So we need...
Actually, I'm taking more of the time you need.
So I think, let me conclude here. I think you can understand where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
The problem with the laws is not, the most worrying part of it is that we all have the solution at the tip of our fingers. Where the problem comes, me, you, and him coming together, working and dedicating ourselves that we must see this problem comes to an end. Thank you very much.
We'll look at issues surrounding Almajiri system and how do we transform the system to better. And the one to take a lead on this group is going to be Ali what? Sorry? Ali Sadiq. Oh? Ali Sadiq Abubakar. So these are the 4 groups we have, and as I've said, we don't want to impose.